Harsha?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. So welcome to JCI training series. So welcome to JCI APDC Connects, Together Future Forward. So today we'll have a training session on consensus building as an essential skill for inclusive leadership. Today we have two wonderful speakers and proved leaders with us. So one, Dion Morley, 2020 JCI New Zealand National President, and we have another speaker, Nurain, Janah, 2018 National President of JCI New Zealand. So welcome to both of you, and thank you for accepting this invitation. So now over to you guys. Now floor is handed out to the trainers, so let us hear to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. We're really excited to bring this training to you. And first of all, before we get started, you can see the link right there. If you could please log into the link, there should be a poll there that we'd love to hear from you. Some of your thoughts on what you felt in decision making, because we're going to be talking about consensus decision making today. So if you could all go to slido.com and log in there and answer the question, we'll come back to your answers shortly. So before we get started, I really wanted to ask a question to Dion as well, to ask why you thought that this was a topic that was really important.
Always nice when they don't tell you that's coming. Okay, so look, for me, this was something that unintentionally have probably been exposed to for a large portion of my life through how my parents and my family makes decisions, and how other organisations that I've been involved in the past, like ISEC, also make their decisions. But it was something that was brought to fore when we started our term in 2018 for JCI. And it was the first time that I actually sat down and thought about this, sort of how we make these sorts of decisions and the way that we do things in New Zealand. And the more that I've come to understand using consensus decision-making, the more I've understood how uncomfortable I feel when a process is used other than that. And I think that for me, I mean, and this is a quote from, I don't know, you, I hit the privileged jackpot. I'm white, I'm male, I'm straight. So really easy for me to do well in most situations. But from talking to you and from talking to other people, the understanding that I get is that this sort of decision-making framework is the one that allows the best decisions to come from everyone, not just from loudmouths like me.
Great, thank you so much, Dion, and sorry for throwing you that question out of the blue. I really wanted to draw that out because I think it's important to reflect as leaders, really important to reflect on why we do the things that we do and the processes that we take up. So the reason I'm asking the question of what does it mean to be an inclusive leader is really to draw that out. So I'm not too sure if the participants are on Zoom or Facebook, but if you are, I'd really love you to type in your answer to what does it mean to be an inclusive leader for you. Doesn't look like, sorry. Doesn't look like the participants are on Zoom, so I'll keep going. So for me, as you've heard from Dion as well, what it means to be an inclusive leader is to really hear other perspectives. It's to have empathy. It's to draw out those other perspectives from other people and really understand why someone is coming from their position. And I think actually it allows us to grow as leaders. It allows us to make better decisions for the organisation, for the projects and for the communities that we serve. As part of understanding other people, humility is also a really important quality, and I'll touch on that in a minute. So as I have learned about inclusive leadership, I found a really great model that talks about inclusive leadership is the Deloitte University Press research, which shows you 6 traits that apply to an inclusive leader. So the 6 traits are, you can see that on the screen here, if I move away a little bit, but the 6 traits are cognizance, so really understanding another person. It's also curiosity, being really curious about where someone else is coming from, what their perspective is. There's courage, because it takes courage to step up and ask the question and be willing to be wrong. or be willing to really listen to someone else's truth as well. The commitment piece is also really important, because in order to take this process of inclusive leadership and consensus building as a tool of inclusive leadership, to take that process on, it takes a lot of courage to step out of your zone and commit to that courage every single time, because it is really building that into your leadership toolkit and continuing to practice that, not just once, but every single time that you see there is a need for a process like this. And we'll talk about the situations where consensus building can be really good for leadership, the situations where it might be a really good tool to be used. Would you like to add anything there, Dion? Cool. So the last two pieces of the Deloitte University study and the 6 traits of inclusive leaders are collaboration and cultural intelligence as well. I think cultural intelligence is something that we do embed within the JCI International Network, and that's something that we can be really conscious of when we're making decisions as well. And collaboration is built into the consensus building process, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we can include that.
The only thing I will add to that is that this is like the whole process of using consensus-based decision-making. It is a skill. It's a thing that you develop and get better at. It is not something that you can sit down and read this. This is something that I've been trying to be better at for years, and I still have failures within this area, and areas where, on reflection, I've not done as well as I could have. But this is something that you're only going to get better at if you continuously try and improve yourself in this area and continuously expose yourself to different people and perspectives to slowly build those skills within yourself.
That's a great point, because you've had the courage to actually, own up to the fact that it is a process, and yet you are still learning as well. And I think that's a great demonstration of some of those qualities. So thank you. So next, I'm going to ask you, what is consensus? So I'm not too sure how clearly you can see that picture there, but it is a picture of a boat called the SS Consensus, and everyone's on one side, because typically when you think about consensus building, it sounds like everyone agrees to one point of view or one decision. And so this is a great example of what consensus is not, because if everyone agrees, then you might end up like this boat, because you've all gone to one side and it's not balanced out. What we are going to try and share with you today is that consensus building actually is not everyone agreeing. It actually does not equal unanimity. It is about looking at every individual perspective within the room or within the team and drawing out from each of their strengths to understand what we can bring and create together. So there's some definitions here that you can read up on later, but what I wanted to share with you here is that it is a process. I really love this, this phrase that comes from Arietta and Wallace around consensus building as a journey and a destination. So we call it consensus building because it's such a process to get there, and it's a resolution that everyone collectively agrees to. And we'll delve a little bit deeper into that. But I also wanted to stay here and touch on why we might use consensus building and why we might use Robert's rules, which is used in our General Assemblies through JCI, and it is a great skill to have, to use Robert's rules in order to make the key decisions that we want to make. The reason why consensus building is important is because if we're trying to create a project, say for example, or if we're trying to get to a really creative idea or solution, it really draws out the strengths of the team members around. And it typically, if you've got different stakeholders with different ideas, it allows those things that if you were, for example, going with a majority decision, you might not have thought of, and it might be that the decision that you get to at the end isn't as fulsome and isn't as considered as you might have with consensus building. So I'll go on to the next piece where we're going to be talking to you about when you might choose consensus building, and I've touched on that a little bit here. And on these points, we're going to be building on some of the tools and giving you some tips and tricks that we use with the JCI New Zealand teams, both the national and local teams as well. So as I've said, if there is a complex issue that you're tackling, if it is a complex problem or a project or an idea, this is a really great place to be using consensus building.
Some of the examples of that will be things like picking your team or term's values for the year, setting out anything really where there is scope for more than just a yes or no answer, where you're wanting to work out, if you're creating a project, then someone is not going to sit down and say, here is my idea for a project, and we vote to pass it, yes or no. One of the better ways, or what we believe is a better way to deal with this is as part of that analysis process, is you can actually break it down into its elements. You can discuss each strength or weakness of it, decide how it aligns with your values, and actually work through it in a process that leads to a project that may not even look like the one that it was at the start, but is one that actually the team is in a better position to get behind, and it's built on the framework of that original idea, rather than just potentially discarding the original idea because it didn't meet a 50% threshold or something similar.
Absolutely, great point there. And similar to that kind of scenario, if there's lots of different participants, and perhaps it's a national project for in the JCI context, and there's lots of different local chapters involved, it's a great way to great framework to bring in, where you bring in representatives from each of the local chapters, and they can build consensus towards creating this national project, and that might bring in the flavors of each of the different local chapters as well. So that's what I mean by multiple participants, and those are scenarios where consensus building can really give you some value. I'll leave the third point there and come back to it in a minute. We've touched on creative solutions, and Dion's also touched on how that comes up. There's also scenarios where you need buy-in. If you feel that you've got an idea as either a national board, local board, or even just a JCI member that has just joined and has a brilliant idea, if you need buy-in from others and you want to influence and really get other people to buy into your idea, consensus building is a great way to do it, because you're presenting, but also you're allowing other people to shape and create that idea so that it becomes collectively owned, rather than something that is top down and really just mandated from one perspective.
And also, if you're trying to get people to, support your project, then by allowing them to have a bit of involvement, as Nurain said, they have that little bit of ownership over it. It's not your project that they're deciding on now. It's your project as a group, and they have that sense of ownership over it. They want it to succeed because they've actually had some form of meaningful contribution to making it created or designing the process that's going into it.
Absolutely, great point. So what I wanted to come back to, that third point, high trust and high commitment. Really, when I look at that I look at that idea as a precursor to consensus building. If you are in a low commitment, low trust environment, consensus building isn't going to work, unfortunately. So the first thing that you have to look at is, quite aside from what is the outcome that you're driving towards, and will the outcome be improved by having this process, and it's not just a yes or no answer, is about the trust that you have within the team and within the stakeholders that you're bringing together. And also the commitment. If people are really committed to bringing out their ideas, wanting to contribute, then consensus building is a great thing to do. However, if people are disengaged, they're not interested, if you're having meetings and no one's talking, then it can be a sink of, a waste of your time really to go through that process. So you have to think about that. I'm not saying if there is low commitment or low trust that you give up on this process entirely, and we'll talk a little bit more about how you might bring in some of that trust, how you might bring in some of that commitment from other members, and then start consensus building towards what you want to do. But just wanted to note that first.
The only thing that I'd add to that is that the example that I would sort of exemplify when you worry, if you're worried about the lack of trust in situations like that. So when we first started our team, Nurain had us all go up to a local scout den and spend the entire day starting to work on our goals for the year and our how we wanted to shape JCI New Zealand. Now, at the time that we all arrived, we all barely knew each other or had met maybe once or twice before that at the election and things like that. So this was a really good opportunity. Even though we were starting with low trust, we quickly worked through a series of exercises, and we, by the end of the day, we were able to be in this space where we were working toward this. And this is because the facilitator that we had that day was especially experienced in building that kind of trust atmosphere that everyone felt comfortable to contribute. So it's not something that you have to rule out, for the next 6 months while you build trust in your team. Rather, it's something that you gauge on the day and with the various people that you've got together in the room at the time.
Thank you, Dion. That's a great point. And I also want to add that I'm a really big believer that you can start small and build up to it. So you can try little things if you have your national or local chapter meetings or even project meetings, and start trying some of the tools that we're going to talk about in a minute. Just insert a few minutes at a meeting to say, hey, I've got this quite a small idea that I might try and discuss with you using some of those consensus building ideas, and you can get your team more familiar with that process and then keep building up to a full process of creating projects and decisions through consensus building. So I'm going to hand over to Dion to talk about one of our tools, which was commitments and protocols. Did you want me to talk about the background first? Yeah. So we introduced this framework of decision-making on consensus building throughout our national and local chapters because of these ideas of inclusive leadership, but also because we wanted to insert that creativity. We are quite a small national organisation, so I think creativity and bringing people together and that ownership and creating commitment was really important to us. So just so you know that I'm not making this up, this is rooted in some research that these two individuals, Michelle and John McCarthy, has done. If people are familiar with agile methodology, they might be familiar with these. So the idea is that as a group, like Dion was mentioning the example of bringing us together and really understanding our values of working together as a team. Jim and Michelle McCarthy, they talk about some commitments that you make as a team. So at the start of the term, for example, the team would come together, as Dion's 2020 team did earlier this year. They came together and they said, okay, we commit to making sure that we hear each other's ideas, for example, or we commit to making sure that if we're given a responsibility, we'll take responsibility and ownership over it. So those are some examples where you can be really quite explicit around those commitments. And then the protocols also, there is some research around the protocols that we use, but I'll leave Dion to delve deeper into that.
Cool. So what I'm going to run you guys through at the moment is the JCI New Zealand decision-making framework. So what this is how we as a national and some local boards make their decisions. It is not a be-all and end-all, but it is the governing principles that underline how we should try to operate at all times. So the first key point is that all of our decisions are made in accordance with our organisation's values and our mission statement. So when I say values, I mean both JCI internationally as an organisation's values, but I also mean the values that each team sets at the start of their term for how they want to treat each other. So my board sat down, as Nurain mentioned at the start of the year, and we found a set of 6 values that were for how we agreed that we wanted to treat each other. They weren't about what the organisation was going to be doing. This was purely about us as a team working out what really was important to all of us as we were working together. So once you've decided that you're going to be following your values for your decision, you then have to understand this is where we tie in a slight bit of the legal framework, but that just like the New Zealand Cabinet, which is the sort of the head group of government, how they make their decisions, is that we operate on a principle of collective responsibility. So you can have whatever discussions you want in that boardroom, but once the decision is made in the boardroom and we go outside of that to the rest of the organisation, we together as a board have made a decision. So you don't have people sort of going around and going, well, actually, I kind of disagreed with that decision. You know, if you're on the board and you've been involved in that process, then collectively you're responsible for it. And because of that, consensus is always the desired outcome. If you know that, you know, you are going to have to stand by the decision of the board, then what you really want to do is make sure everyone on the board feels comfortable actually standing behind that decision. If consensus can't be reached, then and there is no values-based objection, then a decision can be made by simple majority. And what I mean by that is we recognise that as an organisation, especially one that's still trying to regrow ourselves, things do need to happen. We need to be getting stuff done. So this was our way of building in an ability to break that deadlock if you really do reach that point. So if you work through all the consensus techniques that we're talking about and will talk about, and you get to the end and you find, actually, you know what, we've got, you know, 2 people thinking one way and the rest thinking the other, we can still have a vote, provided there is not a values-based objective, and that's objection. And that is based on the foundation that we've agreed on this set of values as a group together, and that if something that we're doing goes so far against one of those values that a board member feels that they've got to say, you know, we can't do this, then we really do need to be re-looking at how that decision is being made and what that decision is. And finally, and bear with me, this one's a bit of a lengthy one, but board members are accountable for the decisions made which affect their portfolios. The responsible member holds a veto right over any decision that affects it. The responsible member must provide a justification for using that veto, but the veto can't be overturned by the board, although they can question you on that. Now, what that means is that, for example, if you are the treasurer and the rest of the board is trying to pass a decision that you know will leave the organisation with no money, or will be using money in such a way that it doesn't comply with your legal obligations as a charitable organisation, then you as the finance or the treasurer have the ability to veto that decision and say no, but you must explain to them why. And that's because ultimately each member of the board is signed up to take over responsibility of a specific portfolio, and they need to be the one who are able to ensure that their portfolio is respected and that, you know, that the base requirements of that role are fulfilled. What I would say to this is, you know, while this is a very high-level structured approach for a national board where everyone has clearly defined roles, the similar approach can be done to a lesser degree, no matter what the project size is. You know, if it's a marketing decision, then the person in charge of marketing would have a veto over it. So it's definitely something that we can work within for everybody, and everyone can, you know, adapt this sort of a model to suit their own organisations. So we've got a couple of techniques that we have used or would like to utilise. There's 3 of them in total, and then we'll have a little bit of a chat at the end about them. But effectively, these are ways that we found help work you toward consensus. So they're things that you can start applying straight away, and then over time, you know, as you get used to them and get better at them, then you'll be able to bring in your own learnings and developments to your own processes for your boards to whatever suits you. The first one that I'll talk about, post-its, turning 120 options into 6. There's a reason for this. It's a very specific example. So I was lucky enough last year to attend the JCI Academy, and one of the roles that I was given was I was put as the ambassador for our group to meet with the other group's ambassadors to help set our beliefs and commitments that we were going to make as a team of future JCI leaders. So what we had to do for this is each group, and there was 20 of them, had created 3 beliefs and 3 commitments that were based on that belief. And so everyone had gone away. That was our homework for the night. Some groups I know were up until about 3 o'clock in the morning working on these. So every group was particularly attached to their set of values. There was a high level of emotional and mental investment into this, and every single option had to be treated with the same level of respect. So what did we do? Well, we all got together as the ambassadors, and we got a copy of every single group's ones printed out on a piece of A4 paper and laid out on the ground. And then I said, okay, everyone, so all the ambassadors, all 20 of us, get 6 votes each for each category. So 6 beliefs and 6 commitments. And you were able to go down and mark down. So that meant that everyone could vote for their own ones if they felt that they were the best ones, but then they would also have to vote for 3 other people's ones as well. And then what we did is we actually looked at those, And very quickly, we were able to determine that about 80% of the votes went to the same top 10 in each category. So we very quickly culled the rest. And even though some of those options were gone, what it meant was that most people, or I believe all people, had at least one or two of the beliefs and commitments that were ultimately used in that final selection process. So that was using a bit of normal democracy to just quickly cull down to a simple list. Then what we did is we took that list and we put them up on a board. We showed how much of a priority they were given. And then as a group, we started to merge and join them together so that that we could accumulate votes. So for example, there were two different ones that dealt with tech, the use of technology and social media. Now, each of those had gotten around, say, 6 votes each, which meant that they weren't rated that highly. But if you actually put them together, then they were one of the highest scoring options. So what it meant is, because we were looking at it as a whole, we were able to go, well, we can put these together and find a wording that incorporates the meaning behind both of those. And it means that those people who had said that this was the most important thing for them were able to have their voices heard, and that was included. And in the end, we managed to whittle the 120 options down to the 3 beliefs and the 3 commitments that we then read out at the Academy last year. This process did take a couple of hours, but for something like this, where you're saying, this is something that we're going to make, everyone in the room, which is, 100 delegates, all stand up, confirm that they were going to agree to, and that they were going to try to live by for the next 12 months. And you wanted everyone to have some buy-in. So we had to make it that everyone in that room, even though they weren't present when we were making this decision, would be able to look up at those beliefs and commitments and see an element of what it was that they'd originally decided last night in their groups, in the 6 items that we were able to put before them. And so that is the post-it method. Now, the reason we call it the post-it method is that when we were deciding our values this year, I made everyone on the board write down on post-it notes a series of values, and then we stuck them up around the room, and that way you're moving. No one's standing over you watching which ones you're voting on, and you can sort of put down which ones are the most important to you. And then we would look at the post-its and see which ones could be grouped together. It's because they're on post-its, they're movable, they're adaptable, you can shuffle them around. We had them up on the whiteboard just behind me here, because this is actually where we had our first meeting for the year, and you'd move them around and shuffle them, and it becomes a bit more of a tangible exercise. And again, because it's on that note, rather than just, is it this, yes, no, chucking it aside, you put them together and you can start to sort of group things up, and then as a group, you recreate that wording. Now I'll hand back to Nurain, who's got 2 more different techniques that we like to use.
Thank you. And I would just add an example that I think the Dion's example about Academy is a really interesting one. Those of us who have been to Academy, have had the privilege to be hosted by JCI Japan, will know that that is a process that is common to all of us. And it's a really interesting process to go through, given we are coming up to be new leaders. So thank you for sharing that. One of the things I wanted to touch on before we move on is, as an example, earlier Dion talked about one of our protocols being that if you're responsible for a particular portfolio, you get to make a decision on what, you get to make a veto decision on that. So I wanted to give you an example so that you can start thinking about how you might apply it. So at one project that I was involved in where we made a decision, it was quite a simple decision. We were making a decision about what color t-shirts we might print for a conference. I'm sure that most of the JCI conferences, we might have decisions like this. So what happened there, we were a group of people. So some of the team members were responsible for the operations and logistics, some were responsible for the program, some were the facilitators, and the marketing and design people. So the marketing and design team came in and said, hey, I actually want to print yellow t-shirts this time because that's a pretty color and we really like it for design purposes. And what happened was, when we used the consensus building framework, actually the operations and logistics team really disagreed, and they said, no, this is not a decision that we can stand behind. And at the end of the day, everyone was kind of very confused because, it's just a color of a t-shirt. But because we went through the decision making through consensus building and really drew out and asked the question of the people who are disagreeing to say, why are you disagreeing? How can we, one of the things that we'll talk about in a bit is asking that question to the person who is disagreeing and saying, what might make you agree on this decision? How can we change it so that you agree? And that's a really great way to draw out what the real reason behind it is, rather than asking the why question. If any of you are familiar with psychology, you will know that asking why makes people really defensive. The why question sounds like you're really digging into a person and makes people put their backs up against the wall. So with consensus building, you have to really be quite open-minded, ask open questions. What is going to make you want to agree with this decision and move forward? That really invites people and really allows people to feel comfortable sharing their opinion. And that's really what consensus building is about. And it's awesome that Dion has been able to do that through the Academy values as well. So we're going to share with you some more tools. So the second one after the post-it method is how you run effective meetings. So as we know, we run a lot of meetings through JCI and we have a lot of protocols with the Roberts Rules, for example, but with consensus building, you have to really keep in mind some of the roles and the dynamics that you have in a room, because we're trying to draw out and make people as comfortable as possible and invite them to share their opinion. We have to run meetings slightly differently. They all look really familiar, but the only item that I might touch on here and stay on is the gatekeeping idea. So the gatekeeping idea is that you have a chair, but then you also appoint a gatekeeper. The chair keeps to the agenda, but what the gatekeeper role does is that they look at the people who are talking and who are contributing, and they also keep an eye on the people who are not able to contribute. And they also keep an eye on those, some people, they really like to talk. So the gatekeeper will say, hey, I'm just going to pause you there and pause your thought there because we haven't heard from other people in a while. So let's invite other people to contribute before we come back to your idea.
So in the JCI New Zealand board, that's a role that had fallen by the wayside for a while, and I've just recently reinvigorated it. In a large part, it's actually just called the Dion shut up rule. I am a talker and I like to do that. And something that I've recognized is that when I am the one talking, I'm not able to pull myself back in and stop myself as easily as someone else who's sitting on the outside might notice. And it is hard if you're the sort of person who likes to share in a meeting and likes to have those discussions, for you to actually take that step outside yourself and realize that, of the last 30 minutes, you've spoken for 20 of them. So it is a really important role. And it also, because they're that slight bit detached from the room, they, as Nurain said, they pick up on the people who aren't contributing or who might look a little bit uncomfortable, which if you're the chair, and rightly so, you are busy making sure that the meeting is running. You are addressing the points that need to be raised. And while you might go around the room quite quickly to sort of, is everyone okay with this? How do we all feel about this? That person who's the gatekeeper is the one who spots, actually, this person was sort of, frowning and jotting notes, and they know to ask that follow-up question of that person to try and get them to engage with that reason that they might not be, fully on board with the project or program or whatever it is you're doing.
Absolutely. And we will come back to doing that. That process, again, requires a really high trust, high commitment environment. So when it happens at JCI New Zealand board meetings, even during my time as national president, everyone knew coming in that we had a gatekeeper, and that if the gatekeeper was the person who was not able to share their thoughts or who was not able to, stop themselves from sharing their thoughts, we were totally allowed and given permission to gatekeep the gatekeeper. So it's really building that trust and environment where everyone is allowed to share, but then also building in some systems and using some key things like using a gatekeeper and key tools to allow for everyone to contribute fairly and equally. Do you want to add anything else to that one before we move on to it? Yeah, great. Thank you, Dion. So the very last piece that we wanted to talk about, and we've touched on this so much, is the trust. So as young leaders, we know that trust is a really key thing. And you know that trust is key within personal relationships, within business relationships, and as we work together and volunteer together for our community, that is important. So what I wanted to touch on with trust here, I'm not sure how well you can see this little cartoon here, is that trust can be built in many different ways. So what does it mean to build trust? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat. I can't see it at the moment, but I will go back and have a look at it when I have a moment to look at it, because I think it's a really interesting piece to touch on.
I can do an example if you want to check it. Yep. So just on the, and funnily enough, it actually relates to trustful. So when I was 17, I had the fantastic opportunity to attend a leadership course in Italy. And, you know, in movies, when they go on these leadership courses and these camps and they're all, you know, they finish it with the trustful, and it's to show how much they've grown and changed over the point, you know, over the course of the course. Well, day one, 9 a.m. in the morning, we started with trustfuls off of a set of barrels shoved out on the lawn. And that was kind of to exemplify to everyone in the room, or at least this was the discussion that we had when we were sitting down afterward, that actually trusting someone with your physical safety is about as easy as it gets when you're in a room full of strangers, but you know that everyone will judge each other if they hurt you or if they let you drop. You know, it's quite easy to actually go, you know what, they'll catch me because they don't want to look like a dick. But it was the further exercises that we did and the more sort of personal reflection that we were doing that showed, you know, the next level of trust, which is actually being able to be open and be a bit more vulnerable with each other about what you're thinking, feeling, and what your sort of belief systems and all of that are. That is what requires the real trust. And this is basically just sort of a surface layer of it. So I think that's really important to keep in mind is, you know, this is not like 1 or 2 series exercises. This is a slow process that you build up, and you build it up by showing vulnerability. Did you want to talk about chickens?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Dion. That's a great point. So one of the things that we do with JCI New Zealand, there's a couple of protocols that we've touched on earlier, but then some of the systems that we build on is to create that high trust environment, but then you really build up to it. So one of the tools that I introduced, and I use this in all of my meetings because I think it allows people to really come into a meeting and really be present. I'm not sure if you know that experience of, you know, you've just finished work. JCI meetings are usually after work, or you've had something during the day and you're coming into a JCI meeting and you've commuted or you're rushing through and, you know, you haven't really had time to pause in the day. So this idea of a check-in really allows people to come into the room and, you know, share what's top of mind for them, and then allow it to kind of sit there aside from the work that you're trying to do together. And so Dion can share his experience about what this does. But so the check-in protocol basically is that when everyone arrives into the room, we invite each person to share what's something that they are mad, glad, sad, or afraid of, or any combination of that. And really, those 4 words are used because then what that allows people to do when they're sitting there and the chair or the gatekeeper has just invited them to share things on those 4 words, it allows people to pause and think, I haven't actually had a moment to think about this all day, and they're tuning into their emotions. So again, if you think about human psychology and those interactions and what you want to do to draw out the best in people, it's really allowing that space and the quietness for them to reflect on how they show up in a meeting. I'd love to hear from you, Dion.
Yes.
How that feels.
So when we first started, I was like, oh, this is a bit odd, but all right. But in reality, what it was is at first when we sat down and we started doing them, they usually at the beginning of your term, they're going to be quite superficial. It is, I am glad that it was nice out today, or I am mad that I got rained on my way here. I am mad that I'm stressed at work. I'm afraid because I, you know, have got this big project coming up. Then over time, you start to get a bit more, you build that trust as a group, and sort of as the chair, it is also a good way of going, well, you know, what are the trust levels in this group? Well, when they do that, you can see based on how much people are willing to reveal about how they really are feeling during those check-in processes. Nurain is often angry about various social issues in the world. And so we as a group are able to go, okay, that's Nurain's frame of mind today. That's how we feel about it. I'm usually just quite happy. So when I'm not happy, everyone would know, if I said that I was afraid of something or I was angry about something, then that was because that was something that I was really feeling at that point in time. And it's not a situation that I'm normally in. I don't function well when I'm angry. And so everyone else in the room was able to acknowledge that. But what I meant was when I said that, I'm like, guys, this is me. This is how I am right now. And now I can put that aside and we can focus on the meeting. But you all know what I'm working with right now. And that's just a really good way of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. What I would also say about the check-in protocol is that if you as a chair as coming in and saying, hey, we would like to do this with this team, and you get the buy-in from the team, perhaps you use consensus building to get the buy-in from the team to do that. It's a really great way to really hold people accountable together to saying, we are going to commit to be inclusive. We are going to commit to our team as whole human beings and not just the role that they have in this project team or at this in the JCI National Board local chapter, whatever role they have. We're seeing them as a whole person. Individually, we know that when we show up somewhere, we show up as ourselves. We show up with our emotions, we show up with our beliefs, with our perspectives, and creating that space really allows them to feel that safety at the very outset, at the very start. And that starts building that trust environment to say, hey, if they feel that, I really felt like, having Dion and the team around where I could feel safe to say, hey, I'm really angry that there is a lot of racism going on in politics at the moment, for example. And the fact that the team is able to listen to me say that and really create that safe space for me to come and be open about that, then allows me to feel that I can share a bit further. And like Dion mentioned, it allows the team to understand where you're coming from and perhaps where your emotions are, if you're addressing something from a really happy kind of light-hearted way, or as sometimes I tend to do when I'm mad about social issues, to come at it from a really justice-oriented way. People then understand what it is rooted in, and then we have a shared understanding of what pieces of strengths people are bringing into the room.
The only other things I'll add is just in terms of the actual practicalities of running it for your teams, there's two other things that we do with it. One is you're not allowed to respond to other people's ones, other than maybe a mild congratulations if they give you some really good news and you just sort of do it in a happy way. But you don't substantively reply or answer anyone's check-ins other than by when they finish their check-in, and the way they let you know that they've finished sharing is they say, I'm in, and everyone else in the room actually says, welcome. And that I found just on its own is, I know we get, a fair bit of grief for appearing a little bit culty sometimes, and maybe having a room of 12 people go, welcome in unison is not the best way of dispelling that, but it does make you feel truly welcome in the meeting, and it's a really nice way of signaling each person joining the meeting is when you get that welcome, that I'm in and welcome moment, is they are now fully part of this meeting and they're involved, and it is a nice little way of signing in.
I was wondering, Dion, should we try that out so that people see how it lands? I know we're just two people, but we can try it out. And I'm happy to invite some of the APDC team here if they would like to join in our trial run of the check-in protocol. Please do join us.
We would really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm happy to start off. So just to remind you, the check-in protocol has 4 words. You can say something that you're mad, sad, glad, or afraid of. So hi Dion, and hello to everyone who's watching. I am really glad that I'm able to talk about this consensus building topic today because it's something that I'm really passionate about. I am not mad about anything. I'm afraid of the amount of work I've got coming up in the next week. I'm not sad about anything, and I'm really glad to be facilitating this workshop with you. And I'm in.
Welcome.
Thank you. Would any of the APDC team like to try it? Or Dion, you can try it as well.
I'll let you guys have a go first if you'd like.
No? Okay.
All right, so the last example from me would be I'm really glad that I was able to achieve a really good result for a client on Friday, so that's kept me on a bit of a buzz going into the weekend. I am afraid for what my diary looks like in the upcoming couple of weeks, especially since I've taken next Friday off, and so I know how much I have to get done by Thursday, close of business Thursday, and I'm in.
Welcome. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how that flows. It is a lot more powerful when you've got a team together and everyone says welcome at the same time. You can really feel the energy in the room shift at that moment. And also how I feel when I say I'm in and I receive that welcome, it really shifts the energy and the mindset that you have. So I believe that was coming up to our last slides, and we were going to make some time for some questions.
Yes.
If possible.
Which at the moment, we don't have any in the group chat. Now, I will look like I'm being rude and go on my phone, but what I'm actually doing is jumping on the Facebook live stream to see if we've got any on there. Otherwise, if anyone else has got any in the group chat that they want to fire through, then please do so now.
We're just having a look at the Facebook. It doesn't look like there are any questions. If the APDC team have any questions that people have sent in, please let us know. But what I also wanted to touch on really quickly is that we've given you some really kind of basic tools that you can build in, and as I said, start building it in as you go and slowly introducing it to the team. But what I'd really love to hear about, if you're trying some of this stuff out, or if you have some challenges with that, please let us know as well. I'd love to hear about it. I'm sure National President Dion would love to hear about it as well, because we're both really, I find it quite energizing to think about consensus building and the creativity that it brings. Did we have any questions on the Facebook chat?
No, nothing on the Facebook chat at the moment. I just checked that. So unless anyone has anything else, I think that's probably presentation. We'll make all of our slides available to everyone. We will be popping both myself and Nurain's contact details on those slides when we send them out. Oh, here we go. So this comes from, Susie. Thank you so much for watching. Selfies for Susie. When you do the check-in exercise, what if it gets very heavy with strong emotions?
That's a great point. And that's a really great point, because the idea isn't to have a therapy session, as you might imagine. If it does get heavy, or if it's really unbalanced, I find sometimes there is one or two members that maybe have had a really difficult day or a difficult time, and they come in and they, they come in with a lot of emotion and they want to share it. It's a really great way to make sure the chair really holds that space. I generally, if it happens to me, and it has happened to me before, if it really comes heavy, I will take a pause and say, hey, after we finish the check-in from everyone, I will just take a pause before we start the meeting and say, hey, shall we have a break to have some water? And then as chair, I would go and check in on that member. Other members you'll find as well, they will want to go and check up on them. And as a leader and as a chair, I'm sure others will know that the second thing that you would do in this scenario is to offer some support, if possible, from the organisation and the leader. It does happen, but actually, if it does happen, what it shows you is that you are really creating that high trust environment, because they feel safe to share that vulnerability. But do offer them support, see if they need some external support from either online counsellors or otherwise as well. But great question.
The only thing I'd add to that is that actually happened to me when Nurain was the president, in that 2018, which was my first year on the national board, was just a terrible year for me in everything other than JCI. So there was a few meetings where I came along to the board meeting being quite very upset, actually. And one of the key things that Nurain did around those was actually just, when I did that check-in, is, hey, let's catch up after this meeting. And because I was able to go in my head, okay, I'm going to be discussing this later, I will get to put it all out there later on, I was then able to package it up and put it to the side for myself, because I knew that I was going to be heard out later on, and I knew I was going to be able to have that discussion, and that, in my case, what I needed at that point was a vent. But I was going to be able to do that later on, and so it helped me be able to put it to the side and actually come to the meeting as well. So even if you don't or aren't able to do a full discussion then and there, if you're just able to make sure that person knows that they're going to be able to have a chance to talk about that with you, if it's something that they're going to want to talk to you about, then that is one other way of sort of making sure that they're able to then participate in the meeting and again feel valued. And I knew that I found value because she was going to take the time out of her day later on, after a meeting when it's late at night on a weeknight, to actually go through my own personal issues at that point in time.
But that is also, a great point about building relationships with your team members. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that, have other mentors that you reach out to as a leader as well. I really recommend that. Yeah. Are there any other questions? I'd love to hear any more because I can talk about this forever.
As yet, I haven't got anything else. Here we go. For essential leadership, how to keep understanding our team members to move forward for our common goal. Will team bonding help to a certain extent?
That's a great point. Do you want to take that?
Exactly. Yeah, so look, team bonding exercises are a really good kickstart for this. They basically, they're in a way designed to shorten that trust building process that would otherwise normally take a long time if you only just met around the boardroom table. They're not the be all and end all of this. But they are how you can set the tone for your term. And if you feel that it's appropriate, then you may want to have one as sort of, a mid-year check-in or something like that. In fact, that's something that our board has just had a discussion about, and that we will be doing a bit of an evaluation of how we've been going this year and how we function as a board, because like any board, we've had our issues. And so we're going to sit down as a group and actually go, here's where we're at, here's how everyone's feeling, and actually work through that as a team. So I think you can't rely on team bonding exercises as a one-off, now we trust each other, but done right, they are a really great way of getting that process started. And then if you continue to live the values and the beliefs that you set out at that point in time, then you will be able to continue to grow that trust within a team.
What I'd also add to that, and those are some great points that you've raised there, what I'd add to that is there's two parts to understanding your team and really building that high trust with your team. If you're a leader, even if you're not, we're practicing leadership without the title, and that's really what being a JCI member is about. The two pieces that I wanted to touch on, one is understand your own values, and how that interacts with other people. That real self-awareness allows for you to break that kind of barriers between connection with people. And if you can understand your self-awareness, your values, you know how you show up for the other person as an invitation for connection and real authentic connection. I think that's something that is really key. So really lean into that self-awareness. It's a journey. I'm on that journey. I'm sure Dion is and all the other young leaders are, but start practicing that. The second piece to that, and I really hold strongly to this in my leadership, is for my team members, every single team member, I will continually throughout my term as a leader, or even if I come in without a title of a leader, but a team member, I will continually have coffees with them and ask them the question, how can I help you achieve either the personal, professional leadership goals that you're having? How can I help contribute to that? How can I help facilitate that? And that allows, again, that high trust that invites other people to be open about what their journey is, and you're helping each other, and they understand where you're coming from and what goals you're driving towards. So those are some things that really allow me to improve my inclusive leadership.
We've got another question. This is all getting very exciting from our point of view. These questions are great. So how to select a right leader for a team? I assume by asking this question, you mean within the context of sort of building a consensus around a team, but you...
Sure. Great point. I guess the way that I think about leadership is that everyone can exhibit leadership. In a consensus building environment, what you need isn't a leader that takes charge and kind of, marches on ahead of everyone else. What you need is someone who is able to step back, really step out of the room and observe the room and bring the perspectives together and build the pieces together. So if you have a team and perhaps there is a chair already, the chair can have the courage, remember the 6 traits of an inclusive leader, the chair might have the courage to say, hey, I talk a lot. I might not be the right person to be stepping back into the room and leading this consensus building project, but I know that my team member, because they've had coffees with them and they know that that team member wants to step up into leadership, I know that this team member is really good at this, and let me invite that person. So it's not really about, I guess, selecting the right leader, but really inviting people into that growth phase where they are in their stretch zone as a leader, or even if you have a collection and you're kind of rotating that leadership and allowing people to grow.
Nothing further to add to that.
Thanks, Dion. I think that's the end of the questions, are there?
We've just got one last one just coming now on how to handle conflicts when they arise.
Right. Do you want to take that first and I'll add to you?
Okay, sounds good. So in terms of conflicts, look, consensus building by its very nature can actually, raise a bit of conflict in the room, because everyone is coming to this and going, well, this is what my values are, this is how I feel about this, rather than a simple yes or no. It does, inspire people to raise their emotional involvement in this particular part of the decision-making process. Definitely more so than sort of agreeing or disagreeing. So what I would say to that is that when we're doing it as a team, again, Nurain can't say it enough, it does go back to the trust, because the more you trust as a team, the more you're going to understand where the other person is coming from, and the more you're going to be able to go, okay, well, look, I know how they're coming at this. I know that they're not meaning this is an attack on me or on my project, but at the same token, it is, the biggest thing about this is being very careful when you are putting these, either criticism or constructive feedback of the project or the idea, that you're doing it in a way that it is definitely aimed at the idea or the project itself. None of this is to be aimed at the other board members. We wouldn't tolerate that within the context of a normal board meeting. And you are very much there, what you are contributing. If you're saying you disagree with something, then you're saying, I disagree with this because of this reason and this reason. I believe that it'll have this outcome, or I feel like it will do this for our members. And you're explaining your thought process to it. And I think that really helps minimize those conflicts. Sometimes, if it does escalate, then as the chair, that is when you need to step in. You need to be able to pull everyone back a bit. And then you can work through why that actual disagreement arose with the same people in the room, but that's where you as the chair need to sort of, take that control a little bit and make sure. Or if you're the gatekeeper or someone else, again, if you as the gatekeeper notice that someone else is being hounded by someone and the chair hasn't done anything about it, then that's perfectly within your purview to pull them back into line and say, okay, we need to hear them out, we need to hear their side of the story, and then we need to work through this together as a group.
Yeah, what I'd add to that, and those are some great tips, what I'd add to that also is that one great idea that you can apply where you've got a bunch of ideas, everyone's kind of debating all these, if you've got that post-it note, everyone's debating all these ideas, they're kind of saying, okay, here's the criticisms, here's what's wrong with these ideas. One thing to put everyone back into the room and on mission, but without stopping the meeting and kind of, saying, hey, everyone, we want to be back on mission. One kind of, I guess, sneaky way of doing it is to say, hey, everyone, we are now going to apply a positive frame to all of these ideas. So if people are familiar with De Bono's thinking hats, it's the green thinking hat, where you look at all the ideas and say, okay, I've got this green thinking hat on. I believe it's the green one. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I can't remember.
So I've got this green thinking hat on, and that means that I look at all the ideas for the merits that it has. So that means that someone, if Dion and I disagreed about the merits,
which
of
we
an
do
idea,
often.
If we do often. When we do disagree, what we might do is say, okay, here's the idea that Dion disagrees with. Here's the idea that Nurain disagrees with. So I will go to the idea that I disagree with and say, how can I think about this positively? What are the merits of this idea? And immediately you're then able to kind of shift that perspective. Remember the perspective piece that we talked about initially about being an inclusive leader? You're able to shift that perspective to say, if I was thinking about implementing this idea, here are the merits that it might have.
And on that, we are now at 5:29 and our session will end sometime in the next 60 seconds. So we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much to all of you who are watching, and especially those of you who sent in the questions. It always makes it more entertaining and engaging for us when we've got an active audience.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you to APDC for the opportunity as well. This is a topic that we're really passionate about at JCI New Zealand in practice. So thank you for the opportunity to share. Any questions, do let me know. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, and Dion is as well. So do connect with us. We'll be happy to answer your questions or even apply the consensus building for your project or leadership. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, Morley and Janah. So it was a wonderful session because inclusive leadership is a buzzword nowadays, and building consensus is one of the most important and key part of this leadership. I mean, in the inclusive leadership, I've covered very well, and it was awesome. And the things which I've covered, like building trust, building consensus, are very important things, and I've covered very well. And I hope all the JCs or all the people who have attended here got very good learning out of this session. Because hearing to theories of leadership is different, and hearing to the practical issues in leadership is different, completely different. The most important part or interesting part was like the experiences from JCI New Zealand, because that is what we are expecting from you, and they have done a wonderful job. And thank you so much for accepting our request and addressing our JCI APDC and JCI India members and across the globe. Thank you so much, and thank you, CP, for the opportunity.